Welcome, salmon people of the Watershed Council. The tribes like to refer to us as salmon people, but I could say after 24 years, almost a quarter of a century of working together collaboratively through the Watershed Council, I'm not going to name all the members. We have too many members now to keep track of. I could truly say that we are all indeed salmon people and people of the Skagit at this point. We're all collectively working for one objective, for the betterment of Skagit, to protect and preserve these runs, albeit the tribe's interests, of course, are to preserve and protect treaty rights and preserve our culture. It's all in all of our best interests to have a healthy Skagit, as we all know, not just for the sustainability of these runs that are precious, but also for the improve the quality of life of everybody that's connected to the Skagit and that cares about the Skagit. Right now, one of the things that we're faced with is the availability of public lands where we can do projects. And so we have to kind of rethink and evaluate on how we can implement projects. And, there's many successes over the last 24 years that happened because of the Watershed Council. And again, you've heard me say this before, we don't know where we would be without the collective work and collaboration that has been done. And we want to continue to see everybody improve and work together with the overall objective of making the Skagit a better place for everyone.
I think we have a very good understanding of what we need to do and what the problems are. And the science here in the Skagit keeps evolving. And here in the Skagit, because of the work of many, we have an excellent science base to guide our efforts. And those gains in the science allow us to, if you will, sharpen our pencil to further on the actions that we need to do. And, it's clear that our salmon are mostly limited by available rearing habitat here in the watershed. So obviously protecting and restoring landscape features like wetlands and floodplains and streamside forests is essential to get us to where we need to go. And also, Jock's here and commend all the efforts along with the Kings in that the recently completed Salish Sea Marine Survival Project clearly shows that, that working with our regional partners, we must do what we can to improve prey abundance in what I call the blue water of Puget Sound. Doing this will increase the chances that our Skagit salmon will have increased marine survival and thus better adult returns. So, such efforts on that regional scale in the Sound are as important as all our efforts here in the watershed. And by looking at that regional effort, we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck from our investments here in the Skagit. So as the Skagit Watershed Council family, I look forward to the continuation and nurturing of the strong partnerships we have in place, and in building new partnerships that furthers our mission to build a resilient Skagit watershed for healthy salmon populations.
So salmon in the lower 48 are in peril. In some parts of California, the waters are getting too warm for the salmon to thrive. Oregon has some rivers which are doing okay, but nothing like they did 20 or 30 years ago. Washington has our Great Columbia, which is doing a lot to regain some lost salmon runs, like they're doing some work with dams and everything else, and some Columbia efforts are looking really good. Up here we have the Nooksack, where I grew up, that is a small salmon recovery effort. The river that used to have carcasses strewn all over the banks during the spawn has only a stray carcass. Is a painful reminder that the great salmon runs we used to have. And then there's obviously the mighty Skagit, which I love, with large tribal communities who are not only defined by their relationship with the salmon, it was their cultural touchstone, their livelihood. The salmon were so plentiful that tribes only had to work like 2 to 3 hours a day per person to have all the food they needed, leaving many hours for arts and music. But we know what the problems are. Some of the results of people's actions outside of our area, but in the big fishing fleets up in the northern part of our nation, of our world. But those are decisions made at the state or the federal level. They're not going to be made here. We have a responsibility to work together here in our home to improve the habitat conditions that science tells us we should. I've learned these salmon are mostly limited by available rearing habitat. So restoring and protecting wetlands, floodplains, and streamside forests are essential. But we also have to restore the habitat all the way up to the headwaters. We need to make it so that when the salmon enter our river, we're aware of what they need to go upstream to spawn, then protect the fry until they're safe for them to head back out to sea. So that's our role here at the Watershed Council, sharing the story, people working together voluntarily to find common sense solutions and to help salmon and steelhead recover, while also helping preserve our community's way of life. That's essential. We have to be good neighbors because it'll take all of us working together if we are to succeed. This is a very valiant task we're all heading on.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jeremy J.J. Wilbur. My traditional name is Cuts But Soot, 7th generation, and I carry that name. My grandfather, Claude Wilbur Sr., he chose me to carry his name. He was Cuts But Soot, 5th generation, and like him, I am a lifelong fisherman. I started fishing at a young age with my grandfather. I am a Swinomish tribal senator, as you all know. I currently serve our community in the Senate and the vice chair position, which is also an elected position at Swinomish. The Swinomish tribe appreciates the good work of the Skagit Watershed and Council and the many others it brings together. We continue to view the Watershed Council as a valuable forum for working together towards our common goals to restore the habitat needed to recover all of our Skagit River salmon populations. Since time immemorial, the Swinomish tribe has lived, hunted, fished, and gathered in and around the Skagit River Basin, the Samish River Basin, the marine waters in northern Puget Sound and beyond. We have stewarded the Skagit River Basin to the Canadian border, and that commitment is stronger than ever now, today. Swinomish, or as we're known, people of the salmon, because salmon have played a central role in the tribe's subsistence, economy, culture, spiritual life, and day-to-day existence for hundreds of generations. One of our overarching missions here at Swinomish is to protect and recover salmon for current and future generations. To ensure that the next 7 generations have the same cultural and natural resources that we've been blessed with, the tribe has prioritized restoration of the degraded water quality, riparian habitat, and nearshore and estuary habitat that salmon need to recover throughout the Skagit watershed. Like I said, I grew up fishing in this community, and I continue trying to make a living fishing, as do most of our people here at Swinomish. We bring in tens of millions of dollars annually into the Skagit economy. It's the way many of us make our living, as we have since time immemorial. And but it's becoming increasingly more challenging for us, as we've lost over 80% of our salmon harvest in recent decades. And I will make a note that no other industry has suffered that way. 80%, that's a lot. Like I said, we can't continue to feed our families from salmon the way we used to. That directly harms our treaty rights and ability to continue our cultural and spiritual practices. Our salmon continue to be in crisis. The work we do in the next few years, from planting millions of trees to ensure cold, clean water to our fish and restoring lands in the Delta that were once important estuary habitat, will be even more critical for our treaty rights and the ability for the next 7 generations to fish. But none of this necessary work should come as a surprise. Once again, I'm saying nothing new. It's the same thing we've been saying for many years. It's all based on science and documented in the Skagit Chinook Recovery Plan. We've lost over 80% of the historic estuary habitat in the Delta, and to recover Chinook, we need to convert at least another 2,000 acres of agriculture land back to estuary habitat and restore floodplains and side channels throughout the watershed. Science has told us that most of the, there's a long list of arguments on why the salmon are disappearing, but we here at Swinomish believe that habitat is continues to be a huge problem in the decline of salmon. That means we need to set aside our differences and work together with a broad array of agencies, landowners, and stakeholders to implement habitat restoration on a large scale. That means that parties to voluntary agreements need to comply with our commitments to restore estuary habitat in exchange for valuable ESA coverage on permits. That means, and I will emphasize this, that means that decisions should be based on sound science and not just the opinions of the loudest voices, which we have said before here at Swinomish. It also means that we need to be respectful and speak with integrity and not spread misinformation, even when we have disagreements, which has also happened in the past. That means we all need to continue to engage Seattle dam relicensing process to hold them accountable, impacts their dams caused to the river and our salmon, and ensure that they adequately fund salmon. Myself and the tribe are committed to doing everything we can to ensure our great-great-great-grandchildren can also fish and maintain their cultural heritage as we have and practice our Coast Salish ways. We are making progress, but climate change, which has been mentioned earlier, will continue to be a serious challenge, as we witnessed with crazy heat waves this summer. I know that the commitment of local governments is essential for salmon recovery work, and so is the willingness of private landowners. Our path ahead isn't easy, but together we can achieve recovery in our lifetimes if we are committed to do it. Here at Swinomish, we are hopeful that the Watershed Council will continue to help us move forward to achieve recovery and ensure the tribal, cultural, and natural resources are protected for the next 7 generations beyond.
And those were great welcome remarks, and a lot of talk about the Skagit Watershed Council. And I just wanted to remind everybody that you all are the Skagit Watershed Council, 45 members and hundreds of people who are a part of that process, working together, checking in, all the things that you're doing, whether it's restoration, protection, education, science, all of those pieces. So thank you all so much, and I hope you take those words to heart as well. We wanted to start our program today in recognition of the passing of 3 giants in the watershed who have done an awful lot to get us to where we are today. Lorraine Loomis, Bill Reinard, and Ken Farquharson. And some of them you may know intimately and some maybe less so. And we're just going to give a few notes about each of them. All 3 of these folks passed away within 2 weeks of each other this summer in August. And they've all spent their lifetimes working towards some part of the mission that we're engaged in. Washington Salmon lost an irreplaceable advocate this year with the passing of Lorraine Loomis. And she began her leadership in fisheries management after the 1974 Bolt decision that reaffirmed tribes' treaty-protected fishing rights. She served for many decades as the fisheries manager for the Swinomish Indian Tribal Community and on the Skagit River System Cooperative Board. For 40 years, she was on the Northwest Indian Fish Commission, including the chairperson since 2014. She was also a member of the Swinomish Senate from 1985 to 2000. Lorraine was a keen negotiator and led the North Falcon salmon fisheries planning process for tribes in co-management with the state of Washington. She was also involved in developing and implementing the U.S.-Canada Pacific Salmon Treaty, including serving as vice chair of the Fraser River panel. And she always kept preservation and habitat restoration at the forefront in the fight to maintain and rebuild salmon runs. Bill was born and lived nearly all of his life in the Skagit Valley. Bill served in the Army during the Korean conflict, after which he returned to Western Washington U and earned his degree in '57. He took a job at Cedar Woolley High School teaching biology for 32 years before retiring in 1989. I think most of you know that Bill was a lifelong volunteer in the Valley, worked with the Washington State Fisheries Department. He was a devoted fisherman and, of course, member of the Wildcat Steelhead Club. And some of you may know that he was a founding board member of the Skagit Fisheries Enhancement Group and he was at the first meeting of the Skagit Watershed Council. He contributed to countless streamside projects, such as creating the first signs that read "Yours to Protect" at stream crossings throughout the watershed, installing egg boxes in multiple creeks back when that was a thing, and working with landowners to develop habitat restoration projects, and engaging an untold number of students in the first rounds of salmon education in the watershed. Probably fewer of you know Ken, because he was a Canadian citizen. He was a civil engineer and longtime committed environmentalist. He was born in Kenya to Scottish parents and moved to UK and then Cambridge. In 1959, he immigrated to Vancouver, Canada, attracted by the mountains and the outdoor life he enjoyed. As a structural engineer, Ken worked on large-scale projects like big bridges and dams. However, his environmental activism is his greatest impact. Ken co-founded one of the first environmental consulting firms in BC and spent a lot of time assessing how to decrease the impacts of environmental projects. What's really important to us is that he dreamed big, and he fought hard by co-founding the Save Cypress Bowl Committee, the Sierra Club of British Columbia, and many of you will know about the Run Out Skagit Spoilers, the Ross Committee, which he chaired for more than 15 years. And so with that effort, his commitment was crucial in protecting the upper Skagit watershed from further flooding with the High Ross Treaty. And he spent the last few years of his life working very hard on the donut hole issue in the upper Skagit headwaters, the giant copper mine. Many wilderness parks in British Columbia owe their existence to his dedication. So I'll end by saying I'm sure that we will best honor Lorraine's, Bill's, and Ken's legacy by rededicating ourselves to ongoing individual and group advocacy for environmental conservation, outdoor recreation, the wise use of Earth's resources, and more social justice for people everywhere. And by continuing to encourage and mentor young people who will carry on work on these never-ending issues. But I just have a few slides here that kind of puts our work into context with salmon recovery more largely. And I'll reinforce some of the notes that our speakers hit, which is, in early in this process in 1997, when we were formed, we were focused on, salmon in the science from the very beginning. And looking at all the species here, you see sort of A, B, C, and D. Different species have different life history strategies and different habitat needs. And we recognized that in 1998 and looked across all of those species and all of those types. And that identified for us these key habitats of the tributaries, the main tributaries, the main stem river, and the estuary. We evolved that strategy in 2005 when the Chinook Recovery Plan was written and really focused on this life history model of Chinook salmon in the Skagit River. And this one in particular is from Green, Beamer, and Anderson, at least published in their IMW annual reports. And what it shows is that emergent fry, this phenotypic branching, sort of spread out. They use different habitats depending on what's available to them. And eventually that leads to 5 distinct Chinook life history types. These Chinook, like most of the other salmon in the watershed, really are rearing limited species. And they really depend on properly functioning conditions in our streams, lower streams in particular, and the main stem floodplains, and also the estuaries and pocket estuaries of the Whidbey Basin. And so those rearing habitats are really where we've focused our effort. And we have a high level of certainty that this rearing habitat is limited, and a high level of certainty that wetland connection projects and floodplain restoration projects are working. And so we can have a whole nother science summit on these topics. I won't cover them today, but I'll put a plug in that we're scoping a science summit for December 8th for our next quarterly Council of Members meeting. So we'll talk more about the effectiveness of projects at that time. But that theory and science-based information leads us to why we invest, where we invest, which this map represents. We have tier 1 areas in red, which is the historic estuary of the Skagit Basin. And in yellow are the mixed stock floodplains, meaning more than 2 populations of Chinook throughout the lower watershed, and again up in the Rockport area and the Darrington area. And then we have our second tier of priorities, which includes the smaller floodplains and smaller tributaries and pocket estuaries. And even this is a moving target, an improving target in science, as we're learning, of course, since the 2006 paper in Beamer, that all of the pocket estuaries in the Whidbey Basin are important. And so we'll be expanding this map this year to include more pocket estuaries in the Whidbey Basin. And additionally, we're learning about riparian areas and learning how important they're going to become even more so in the future with climate change. And the state has produced best available science saying that we should move to site potential tree heights. And so our program will be adopting the state guidance on site potential tree heights for voluntary habitat restoration projects. Using the same strategies, using the same areas, but continuing to improve the strategies as we adaptively manage, as we learn more. In the past, we had the ocean conditions, the ocean black box when the fish left and what they did. And we know that our Puget Sound stocks went out and mixed into the Alaska gyre. The 2 things that I wanted to share about this slide is that we know that there are fishing impacts in the Alaska gyre, and we know that those are international issues. And we know that we should put our voice behind the need to continually improve how we manage fishing impacts in that waterway. We also wanted to note, of course, that there's a big effect of climate change, which we'll cover again in a moment. And so we intend to also develop a climate change policy statement, likely where we recognize the need to reduce greenhouse gases, but it's beyond our control at the watershed level, and then adapt our projects to make sure that we're recognizing those changes that are coming our way. So those are 2 examples where we have global and international issues that need to be addressed for salmon. We need to recognize them, but know that it's really a little beyond our exact direct actions here. And then I wanted to just bring in the more regional perspective too. And thanks to the Salish Sea Marine Survival Project, who has completed many years of study with many partners, the tribes in particular, and state and federal agencies, and have characterized the conditions that are impacting early marine survival in all the stocks in the Salish Sea environment. This slide really conveys simply a lot of complicated information. During the marine survival phase, when the juveniles have left the freshwater and they're in the estuary, they characterize the impacts and the level of impacts from river flow, estuaries, hatcheries, food supply, contaminants, predation, and disease. And if we thought about this in the Skagit context, I think most people would agree, according to the science that was presented, that some of these are more important in the Skagit and less important in the Skagit, of course, compared to the region. We know that we don't have as big of a problem with contaminants and disease, and there are almost no hatcheries in the Skagit system. So downscaling, those are probably less important, which makes river flow and estuaries relatively more important. But the big takeaway from their work was the very high impact levels from food supply and predation. This is where climate change really comes home and has dramatically changed the food web in Puget Sound and in the North Pacific Ocean. So again, some of these are international issues that we need to recognize and put some weight behind, but know that there's bigger processes going on. All of this reinforces for us that there's certain dials that we can turn in the Skagit watershed, and it puts into context the work we're doing and how it's important in related to these other pieces of work. The last few slides here are just a quick visual tour to make sure you're aware of 3 very large main stem freshwater restoration projects restoring off-channel connectivity, which is again one of the major limiting factors for Chinook and other species in the system. And so wanted to recognize and thank the Skagit County and Skagit Fisheries Enhancement Group for several years of effort that have now concluded with the physical work at Pressentin Park in Marble Mount area. And so here's some slides of the new channel on the left and the very bottom of the channel, just at the outlet here in the upper right. And then some air photos from a drone on the outlet, and then looking down to the outlet on the right. That takes us then to the next project down the river, the Barnaby project. And Devin's here as one of the major drivers from SRSC as the project manager. And this was done on lands owned by DFW, TNC, and Seattle City Light, again, kind of reinforcing the collective nature of our work. And so in the left side, you see the old dike that was put in to block the Barnaby Slough for rearing habitat. And on the right, you'll see the photo looking up the slough, where now, of course, the dike is gone and there's free access for fish in and out with different floodwaters and different times of the year. And then here's another dike segment crossing Barnaby Slough, where they went over to decommission some of the previous wells used for the system and have pulled all of those dikes and training, I guess, containment areas back so that there's better access for floodplain processes. And then some photos of some of the old fishways and piping and infrastructure that have been now removed as they're starting to finish up the heavy work and pull back to do more of the trail access and parking lots and stuff. So this Barnaby Slough area is one of the, if not the largest, main stem floodplain areas in Puget Sound, and is a great opportunity to try to hold fish and rear fish upstream where there's less infrastructure. But I know they've taken a lot of effort over the years to protect the neighbors there, and I think that's going well. This is phase 1 of other projects to come after they've done several years of monitoring. And then that takes us down to the third project at the more down towards the bottom of the river at the forks of the North and the South Fork. And this is a fish enhancement group project. Engineering was led, I believe, by Tom Slocum at the Skagit Conservation District. And again, it's on mostly Department of Fish and Wildlife lands, these public lands that we're trying to improve so that they support fish recovery. And so at the upper left, you see the wetland areas. And in the other 3 pictures, you see the new channels that were dug to improve fish access. So fish have more places to get out of the main stem, and we can rear more fish waterward of the dikes, and trying to really utilize that area as best as possible. Finally, I'll end with an overview slide of the estuary. There's a lot of work going on. We just described project number 2 in the Forks. But that was construction for this year. Actually, this is South Fork. It'll be constructed hopefully next year by Skagit County in the DD3 on DD3 land. And all the DFW projects down at Wiley Slough and Milltown and Deepwater are in design phases. And then Smokehouse and McGlynn up in the Swinomish Channel. So lots of work going on there. So I wanted to end just with a couple of notes about planning for the next generation of watershed recovery. We know that the Seattle City Light is very busy with all of the licensed participants learning an awful lot the next couple of years. And the Watershed Council will be engaging to listen and learn what those science lessons are so that we know how to incorporate them into our voluntary habitat strategies. And that will be happening over the next couple of years. We're engaged in multiple reach assessments, including the Sauk River Habitat Protection and Restoration Planning process and a Skagit Ross Island Reach assessment led by the Skagit River System Cooperative. We're working on riparian changes to site potential tree height, as you mentioned, and working with our state agencies to improve voluntary habitat incentive programs so that more people will find it positive to join in those programs voluntarily. And we're working on a way to include degraded lands into our acquisition strategy so that we're able to acquire more degraded lands that could be restored on private properties, as Scott Schuyler referenced earlier in his presentation. And we're always looking forward to working with private landowners in the Skagit estuary where it makes sense for all parties involved. So that's where we're going. And hopefully it's been a pretty good tour.